Mind control is real. Sort of. It's actually more of a cutting-edge research technology where you can implant electrodes in somebody's brain and feed them electric signals to change their mind, make them do what you want them to do. Or, in the case of Neuralink, help them do things they've never been able to do. But it's very primitive, and there's been conflicting reports from studies on whether or not it actually works, and has only been shown to work in things like cockroaches. Something that is most certainly real, and something that we've been using since the beginning of time, is a little thing called social engineering. But what exactly is social engineering? And how do you do it? Social engineering is a technique that people use to get information out of others that they normally wouldn't disclose publicly. Whether it's private, corporate, personal, or imaginary information, social engineering is used everywhere. And it is single-handedly the most dangerous technique that we have at our disposal as social engineers. Everyone's favorite chess robot creating company, IBM, estimates that the average data breach caused by social engineering causes the average company $4.1 million per data breach. In his book, Never Split the Difference, former FBI interrogator Chris Voss talks about all of the ways that he used social engineering techniques to interrogate criminals and how he successfully did so. He also talks about how everyday people use the same techniques to get promotions at their jobs, find love, and make friends. And while that might not be fun to be on the same social hierarchy level as FBI interrogators or internet hackers, it's true. In fact, I'm using it right now to get you to like me, to like this video, and maybe subscribe. But the scary thing is, it's a lot easier to get people to disclose private information than you would expect. Former airline pilot Frank Abagnale eluded the FBI for 3 years. He wrote fraudulent checks, stole cars, and impersonated a lot of people. Oh yeah, and Frank Abagnale was not an airline pilot. Ever. He never trained to be one, he never had experience being one, he was just very charismatic. And actually, the FBI was really only pursuing him for wire fraud. They had no idea he was pretending to also be an airline pilot, and a pediatrician, and a lawyer. Frank Abagnale lied his way into every one of his jobs and got away with it. Our brain craves helping one another. And this simple truth is what allows companies to grow, friendships to be made, and countries to conquer. The year is 1972. The United States and the Soviet Union are in the middle of the Cold War. This Cold War is a battle between ideological differences that are core to each country's survival, supposedly. And at any moment, this war could turn into a very, very hot one. The most important resource in this war is information. And the key to getting this information is getting it out of people. How do you get data out of people's brains? How do you extract this information in a readable and understandable format? You control their minds. Mad scientist Sidney Gottlieb was the head of the US's attempt at mind control, otherwise known as the infamous program MKUltra. And Sidney Gottlieb thought that, well, if we just gave somebody enough drugs, they would do whatever we wanted.
I run the underworld, guy.
Which, in hindsight, is an absolutely insane idea that I don't really understand how it got funding. But, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures, and certainly World War II was a desperate time. Because the funny thing about MKUltra is that it didn't start during the Cold War. It started with a little-known project known as Project Artichoke, which is a hilarious name for a project that eventually became one of the most malicious ones in U.S. history. The core of MKUltra was the LSD experiments that Sidney Gottlieb ran, where he would feed knowing and unknowing agents in the CIA the special little drug called lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. And he would see what would happen. Of course, there was a lot of other magic drugs that were in there, like magic mushrooms, cocaine, etc. But this one was one that Sydney had a specific fondness for. There's a lot of theories around MKUltra, and ultimately all of the documents surrounding this program were eviscerated in a CIA fire or a shredder literally shredded in front of investigators. What we have today is a lot of unanswered questions. Were these experiments successful? Do we have to worry about mind control drugs and possible mass hypnotism? However, we do have quite a bit of information on the Soviet project of telekinesis, otherwise known as Soviet psychokinetics and hypnotism. This program is the real inspiration behind Stranger Things and is absolutely, positively insane. Dr. Pavel Naumov's experiment is a perfect example of this. This doctor took a mother rabbit and her kin and separated them on 2 different nuclear submarines. After separating this mother and her children, he slaughtered each of the baby rabbits one by one. And the crazy part is, they measured a noticeable change in the mother's brainwaves at the exact time that each of her babies passed on. The rest of this part of the document is covered in black ink by the CIA. Ultimately, Soviet psychokinetics and MKUltra were labeled as failures by both of their respective governments. However, in failure, there's ultimately
wisdom.
We interrupt this program for an important news announcement.
Why go through all the hassle of science, drugging innocent civilians, and telekinesis when mass hypnosis seems to work perfectly fine?
More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
After we become aware of a phenomenon, we are more likely to see it everywhere. And it's part of the key of our survival. Our pattern recognition skills are what kept us safe for so long.
More people prefer the taste of Pepsi over Coca-Cola.
In the modern era, these social engineering techniques are being used against us. Whether it's by bad actors, governments, or simply by coincidence, social engineering is becoming closer and closer to propaganda.
In recognizing a communist,
any good propaganda strategy uses psychological hacks like ad hominem attacks, appeal to authority, and, most importantly, repetition to infiltrate the minds of its audience.
And agenda control. Exactly.
The goal is to convince the public that the propagandist is right, and what they're saying is true, even if it's the most obscene lie that you've ever heard.
Take off pounds with PVM capsule each day.
There are 30 propaganda techniques that you must be aware of unless you want to be left behind and your friends and family to forget about you.
I'll tell you, my Bernice knows what's good for me.
And what's good for me, too.
But don't be mad at me. I'm just some guy that gathered a bunch of information on the internet and combined it all together to make this video, which, if you've made it this far, it means that you like it, and you should probably subscribe.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs.
If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this video is to always be aware of when somebody is trying to guide you to a decision that they've made for you, and to think for yourself. Ultimately, listen to as many sources as you can, but just be aware of what's going on in your surroundings. It's really as simple as that to avoid social engineering attacks. And the thing about propaganda is that it's so prevalent in today's society. That little segment back there was just me using a couple of the techniques. If you want a full list, I'll link to them in the description below. But make sure you watch all of my other videos so you understand exactly what's going on with this crazy world, because this is the only place on the internet that you
can find it.